8. Linda Bishop. Single mother Linda Bishop was in her 40s when she developed a severe mental illness seemingly out of nowhere. She quit her job at a restaurant in New Hampshire, claiming that the Chinese mafia was after her, and began habitually disappearing for days or even weeks on end with her daughter, while giving false locations to loved ones from gas station payphones. Linda's family tried persuading her to get help, but she didn't think she needed it. In reality, she was becoming increasingly paranoid and delusional. And in 1999, she abandoned her daughter to live as a vagrant, fleeing from the imaginary forces she believed were after her, which at that point included the government. Once in a while, Linda agreed to take medication and her state of mind improved dramatically. But she hated the pills because they hindered her creativity and made her feel like a zombie, and these periods of cooperation were few and fleeting. By 2006, she checked into a mental hospital. By then, her condition had landed her in trouble with the law on multiple occasions for volatile behavior, although she was never aggressive before she became symptomatic. She was released a year later after refusing to cooperate with treatment, and nobody informed her family due to medical privacy laws. Linda believed they were conspiring against her and wanted nothing to do with them, and unfortunately, they were powerless to recommit her to a long-term facility against her will due to the enormous burden of proof the law requires. Linda wandered outdoors until she came upon an abandoned farmhouse that was for sale. For the next 3 months, she lived on rainwater and apples from a nearby orchard. She kept a diary detailing her daily activities, which consisted mainly of sneaking out for apples after dark and hiding inside during the day. There were neighbors nearby who would have helped Linda if they knew she was hungry, in need, or there in the first place, but they had no idea, and Linda truly believed everyone was out to get her. The apple supply ran out when the bitter New Hampshire winter arrived, so there was no heat in the house. So, sadly, Linda passed away in the dark, cold home, weak, freezing, and malnourished, thinking it was the only safe place for her to be. 7. DEANNE Hastings. It wasn't uncommon for DEANNE Hastings to disappear on her family and friends for a few days at a time. Ever since being diagnosed with bipolar disorder, she was very proactive about her mental health. She still experienced episodes from time to time, and sometimes she just needed to get away from it all. And so, the people in her life tended to respect her need for space as much as they reasonably could before beginning to worry about her safety. But they knew for certain that something was terribly wrong when the 34-year-old vanished from her home in Spokane, Washington in late 2015 and never resurfaced. DEANNE left a note behind for her boyfriend, stating that she was having a good day and had gone to the grocery store. For some reason though, she'd left behind her ID and money. Her car was found abandoned in a local parking lot with her purse and cell phone inside. Weeks later, someone found DEANNE's driver's license outside a grocery store. The following day, her credit card was used at a business just outside Spokane. Surveillance footage showed DEANNE buying vodka and birthday candles. Witnesses who crossed paths with her outside the store that day said that she was distraught and asked them for help, claiming she'd been drugged and kidnapped. Police and paramedics were called to the scene, and after speaking with DEANNE for a while, responding officers decided that they had no reason to hold her. She was seen on surveillance footage later that day walking with 2 men, who later claimed they met DEANNE for the first time that day and hung out with her for a while. One of the men, Randy Riley, was caught using her food stamp and debit cards. He claimed he'd left her alone along a roadside due to her belligerent behavior, and that he found her cards in the same place the next day. DEANNE is currently still missing. In the weeks leading up to her disappearance, she was having issues getting her insurance to cover her medications. Until she's found, it's impossible to say whether her mental state contributed to her fate, although all signs seem to point toward it as a distinct possibility. 6. Denis Michael Rohan. In 1969, a 28-year-old Australian sheep shearer named Denis Michael Rohan traveled to Israel and volunteered at a kibbutz, where he and 40 others worked and studied Hebrew. The other volunteers noticed that Rohan was strange, but they were polite to him anyways. One night, Rohan began screaming out wildly in his room. He was having a religious experience of some sort that was so moving he couldn't contain his emotions. Nobody knew that Rohan had an extensive psychiatric history involving hallucinations and a 6-month hospitalization. They had no way to predict that his mental state made him especially vulnerable to a condition experts called Jerusalem syndrome, which is when tourists in Israel experience a psychotic episode marked by delusions of being a biblical figure or participating in a biblical mission. And the other volunteers certainly had no clue that just months later, Rohan would set fire to one of Islam's holiest sites, the Al-Aqsa Mosque. He believed he was preparing for the Second Coming, but he was actually stoking the highest level Middle East crisis since the Arab-Israeli War 2 years earlier. Rohan pleaded not guilty to the crime due to insanity and was subsequently deported from Israel. One of the latest suspected cases of Jerusalem syndrome came in 2017, when Irish tourist Oliver McAfee vanished in Israel's Negev desert. The 29-year-old traveled there to complete a pilgrimage on bicycle along the 631-mile Israel National Trail, but unfortunately he never returned home. Hikers found McAfee's tent, clothes, bike, and other equipment abandoned. Reported sightings continued, but search teams failed to find him. Volunteers helping with the search also came across passages that were torn out of the Bible and weighed down by rocks, as well as papers containing handwritten scripture and a makeshift chapel. The documents suggest that McAfee was performing unusual rituals and/or having a spiritual experience that isn't typical of even the most devout worshippers, indicating that perhaps he disappeared on purpose. His family disagreed that Jerusalem syndrome was a possibility, claiming that his mental state seemed fine before the trip, and instead suspected that he was the victim of foul play. Sadly, he remains missing to this day, so nobody can say for sure why he vanished. 5. Michael Boatwright. In early 2013, a transient was found unconscious in a motel room in Palm Springs, California. He was taken to a local hospital, where he woke up and didn't know who he was. The man thought his name was Johan Ek, and he only understood and spoke Swedish, despite being found with documents identifying him as a 61-year-old US Navy veteran named Michael Boatwright. With nowhere else to go, he lived at the hospital for several months. Any memories of his past, including the identities of his family members, failed to return. At one point, staff suspected Boatwright was faking amnesia, but no matter how hard they tried, they couldn't trick him into speaking English or showing any sign that he understood it. Longtime friend Gifford Searles told Vice that Boatwright had recently moved back to the US from China, where he was living and working as an English teacher until his visa expired. He never readjusted to life in America and soon became a drifter who struggled to get and keep a job. Searles implied that he believed Boatwright was faking his amnesia, which seemed to be the general consensus at the hospital, but was a topic of conversation that people seemed to avoid. Boatwright thought he'd fit in better in Sweden, so the Department of Social Services bought him a one-way ticket there and sent him on his way. Several months after arriving, he told the local press that he was happy in his new home in the port city of Uddevalla. Unfortunately, he was only in the country for less than a year before the sad and confusing final chapter of his life came to an end. 4. Rebecca Press. 31-year-old Rebecca Press was drunk, high on drugs, and had just found out that her recent ex had cheated on her when she lost control of her emotions during a night of drinking in Caerphilly, Wales in 2022. She'd just arrived back at her mother's house, along with her mum's best friend, 57-year-old Mark Ash, when they ran into Rebecca's brother. He was the one who told Rebecca about the affair, and afterward, all hell broke loose. Ash tried to calm the hysterical woman down, only to have a 3-inch knife plunged into his chest. After stabbing him, Rebecca fled and hid in a bush. Police arrived at the crime scene at around 2 o'clock in the morning, and they captured Rebecca about an hour later. She pretended to be surprised and acted like she didn't understand what was going on, but the police weren't fooled by her performance. Ash died from his injuries, despite doctors' best efforts to save him, and Rebecca was charged with murder. She argued in court that she acted in self-defense, and while the judge acknowledged that the murder wasn't premeditated, she concluded that Rebecca knew exactly what she was doing and acted with intent. As a result, Rebecca was convicted of the charge and sentenced to life with a minimum of 20 years. 3. Tony Thomas. 45-year-old Tony Thomas was so passionate about the pigs he raised on his family's farm in Gwynedd, Wales, that he became infuriated when he discovered that his father, 65-year-old Dafydd Thomas, was thinking about bringing some more animals onto the property. Thomas was worried that the new animals would bring potentially life-threatening disease to the farm. He'd also stopped taking his bipolar medication more than a year and a half earlier and was in an especially agitated state of mind. No longer capable of containing his rage, Tony brutally attacked his father in March of 2021. He yanked Dafydd out of a vehicle and threw him to the ground, then proceeded to kick him and stomp on his skull. By the time Dafydd's wife discovered him and summoned help, it was too late to save his life. Tony was charged with murder but denied killing his father. The judge ultimately dropped the murder charge due to Tony's mental health history and tasked the jury with considering him for a manslaughter conviction. He was found guilty, but with diminished responsibility, and was sentenced to indefinite psychiatric punishment. While doling out the punishment, the judge acknowledged that Tony was a serious offender, but said that he believes his condition is treatable and that he could possibly rejoin society someday. He'll remain hospitalized until or unless he's officially deemed to no longer be a threat to the public. 2. Neil O'Dowd. Pub manager Paul Smith was working at a bar in the Irish village of Baldoyle when a former employee, 35-year-old Neil O'Dowd, confronted him in early 2021. O'Dowd asked Smith why he went to Mauritius on his honeymoon. He hadn't, but O'Dowd was convinced that his former boss was somehow involved in the unsolved murder of an Irish woman in the country. Plagued by his own ill-conceived notions, the irrationally angry ex-employee stabbed Smith 19 times, smashed glasses over his head, and beat him with a mop handle. A worker tried to intervene, but there was little he could do to stop the unhinged, violent outburst. Smith was seriously injured and required emergency surgery, but miraculously survived the frenzied attack. Police arrested O'Dowd, who said during questioning that he heard voices in his head and thought his TV was bugged. He also brought up his belief in conspiracy theories and said that he remembered getting into a fight with Smith, but he couldn't recall what it was about. People who knew O'Dowd remembered noticing that he became increasingly paranoid in the weeks leading up to the murder. During his trial, the question wasn't whether O'Dowd committed the attack, but rather whether he understood the difference between right and wrong at that moment and knew what he was doing. They also tried to determine if he wasn't responsible for his actions due to his mental state. In the end, O'Dowd was found not guilty by reason of insanity in early 2023. The next steps will involve determining the correct course of treatment for his mental state, while also considering public safety. 1. Weng Saw. Terror ripped through the streets of Brooklyn in early 2023 when a man driving a U-Haul truck slammed on the gas and rammed into whatever and whoever was in his path. The rampage lasted for over an hour, leaving one person dead and 8 others injured. It finally ended when police managed to disable the vehicle. Officers arrested 62-year-old Weng Saw, who reportedly drove the U-Haul from Las Vegas, where he lives, all the way to New York City. He visited his son, who lives in Brooklyn's Bay Ridge neighborhood, and they apparently got into an altercation. At that point, police believe Saw experienced a psychotic break, which triggered the devastating massacre. The suspect allegedly claimed that he saw an invisible object pass toward his vehicle, which is thought to have triggered his episode. Some investigators have speculated that Saw had a death wish, but like it or not, he survived the needless violence, and he faces charges of second-degree murder and 7 counts of attempted murder. Saw's criminal history consists of at least 8 prior arrests dating back to 2002 and includes allegations of evading police, domestic battery, battery with a deadly weapon, and more. However, It's unclear whether any details about his past can shed light on what triggered his most recent destructive act. Would you rather find out your partner cheated right before you're scheduled to give an important work presentation for the company's CEO, or go through a breakup in the middle of what was supposed to be a dream vacation? Let us know in the comments below. If you enjoyed today's video, be sure to subscribe to the channel. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time. Bye.